Welcome back to the Asia Economic Dialogue 2021. I extend a warm welcome to all of you for our third session. The theme for this session is building reliable global supply chains. This session will be chaired by Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, Chairman of 5F World, a platform for digital startups, skills, and social ventures in India, and is a trustee of the Pune International Center. He is also co-founder of Global Talent Track, Skills Alpha, and Lighthouse Communities Foundation, and two Indo-US joint ventures, CalZoom Advisors and the Center for AI and Advanced Analytics. He has completed two successful CEO tenures over 25 years at Aptech and Zensar Technologies, has recently been elected to the board of directors of the State Bank of India, and serves on the boards of varied global companies such as Hinduja Global Solutions, Sisteth Los Angeles, Asian Venture Philanthropy Network Singapore, and many more. He has also been chairman of NASSCOM, NASSCOM Foundation, and the All India Management Association. Our esteemed panelists for today's session are Dr. Nguyen Thanh, who is founder of the Sovico Group and vice chairman of Vietjet Air. Sovico Group is one of Vietnam's leading and most respected private conglomerates operating across industries, ranging from banking and finance, aviation, real estate and hospitality, renewable energy, oil and gas. Sovico Group has more than 30,000 employees across businesses and companies, not only in Vietnam, but also in Asia and Europe. Sovico Group is also founder and owner of Vietjet Air, the largest airline in Vietnam and leading LCC carrier in Asia Pacific. Dr. Nguyen Thanh received his master's degree in electrical engineering from Ukraine and doctorate degree from the Russian Academy of Science in Moscow. Dr. Inbom Choi is currently representative of Mahindra Group in Korea and senior advisor for Asia region in the Group Strategy Office. He serves as a board member of the Indian Chamber of Commerce and Foreign Company Association in Korea. An economist by training, Dr. Choi also teaches trade policy as an adjunct professor at Sogang University's Graduate School of International Studies. For more than 35 years, Dr. Choi has worked as public policy maker, advisor, and influencer across a broad range of institutions. Prior to joining Mahindra Group, Dr. Choi worked for IBM, GM, and GE. He has also served as the chief economist at the Federation of Korean Industries. Before joining the corporate world, Dr. Choi worked in the public sector. He served in the office of the President of Korea from 1995 to 1996 as Assistant Secretary to President for International Economics. In his academic career, Dr. Choi has been Research Fellow at the Korean Institute for International Economic Policy and Visiting Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, Washington, D.C. Mr. Mamoru Yokoo is Director and Executive Vice President at the Mitsubishi Corporation, India. Having graduated from Hitotsubashi University with a Bachelor of Law, Mr. Yokoo embarked on his career with Mitsubishi Corporation in Japan over the course of more than 30 years of his career. He has garnered long years of experience in shipping, transport, cargo, and logistics. He briefly worked as general manager with Japan's MC Trans International Incorporated and with Singapore's Diamond Bulk Carriers Private Limited. He has, since 2018, served as Chief Regional Officer with the Chennai and Mumbai branches of Mitsubishi Corporation, India. Mr. Rajiv Bajaj, who is Managing Director of Bajaj Auto, graduated in mechanical engineering from the University of Pune in 1988, and then completed his master's in manufacturing systems engineering from the University of Warwick in 1990. On returning from UK, he started off at the shop floor level at Bajaj Auto. He has gained experience in the areas of manufacturing and supply chain, R&D, and engineering, as well as marketing and sales, and rose to be Managing Director of Bajaj Auto, a position he continues to hold today. He has been on the board of Bajaj Auto Limited since March 2002. He has been instrumental in introducing Bajaj Auto to the motorcycle market, a segment he believed had great growth potential. I now hand over the floor to Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, our chair for this session.
A very good morning to all of you, and thank you, Danada, for a wonderful introduction. As all of us know, this is the second day of the Asian Economic Dialogue, and we had a wonderful first day yesterday, starting with our Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar. And in the evening, I think we had members from the World Bank, ADB, many financial institutions talking about, I think, the world situation today and the opportunities for the world as well as for Asia in particular. Today, we are talking about the ability to build reliable global supply chains. And I would add a word to it, reconfiguring global supply chains. And I'll talk briefly about that. As you know, we have a very, very eminent panel, and there are people from Japan, from Korea, from Vietnam, and of course from India, which to my mind represents a large segment of the future of Asia and the future of manufacturing and supply chains for the world. So it's really exciting to moderate this panel. Just as a quick backdrop before I request the panelists to share their views, I think we all know that COVID has wreaked havoc on health, on the prosperity of individuals, communities, and nations, and very clearly created many deficits of trust as well, which creates problems for the world the way it was. Manufacturing economies, and as all of us know, manufacturing demand is just coming back as economies limp back to life. I think manufacturing economies are really looking at how they can be reconfigured. And we will talk about that very much as part of this panel. There are also new trading alliances and collaborations that we are seeing, whether it's RCEP or Quad and quite a few others, which might determine the future of how people look at Asia, how people invest in the economies as well as in the overall Asian economy. So that's something that we have to see. And we are seeing that many countries are reassessing the opportunities for the future. I live in Pune, which is in the western city in India. And in India, we are seeing that there is a huge move towards what is called and what our Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, alluded to yesterday as Atmanirbhar or self-reliance. So we are looking at how we can look at productivity linked incentives to get champion companies from India and from around the world to invest in various areas. I mean, it started off with consumer electronics and hardware. We're looking at auto, and there'll be a huge number of sectors that we will look at. We've also looked at emulating some other success stories and building some collaborative clusters in areas like textiles, for instance, which our neighboring country, Bangladesh, has done pretty well over the last many, many years. And this is something we're all looking at. And essentially, what we're saying is whether it is domestically for each of our countries, where we will build new capabilities, reinforce old capabilities, and possibly build value chains for the future, or indeed to participate in global demand cycles and global supply chains, I think there are opportunities emerging. Why did I use the word reconfigure earlier? Because there is a certain amount of willingness, or if you may call it need for many economies, and we have seen it in Europe, we are seeing it with the Biden administration in the US. So people are talking about reshoring or bringing some manufacturing back to their own countries, nearshoring, or looking at maybe Central Europe for European companies, as well as maybe Latin America for North America, to see whether nearshoring is possible. And of course, there is this very interesting concept of China plus one, because China has been a dominant force in manufacturing. And I think many companies, many countries are saying, can we have an alternative as well? And that is something that I think all the panelists, especially on this panel, I think whether it's Vietnam or India, and of course Thailand and other countries, and of course the big economies of Japan and Korea, I think all of us will be watching with interest. All of us, I'm sure, will be participating with great fervor in making this new thing happen. So that's really the context in which we are in. I would like to also add that while there is a huge pull from COVID and from the global economic restructuring, we're also seeing a big push happening through the digital economy. In India itself, while we are talking about a $5 trillion gross domestic product or GDP in the foreseeable future, we're expecting a trillion of that will come from digital India. And I think the opportunities or the push given by digital is huge. And maybe if you have time towards the end, I'll ask our panelists to talk a little bit about how they are seeing uh, artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive, really playing an impact on their organizations and their supply chains. So this is broadly the context. What we'll probably do is I'm going to request each of our panelists to maybe give their opening remarks in 4 to 5 minutes, then maybe ask a few specific questions based on interesting points they would have come up with. And then I'm going to throw it open to the audience. So feel free to post your questions as they come to you, and we will take up as many questions as possible at the end of the session. The sequence in which we will move is I'm going to request Dr. Hung to make his opening remarks, then Mr. Bajaj, then Dr. Choi, and finally Mr. Yokoo. And as I said, 4 to 5 minutes each, and then we will take it as it goes. So with no further ado, let me request Dr. Hung to please make your opening remarks, sir. Dr. Hung, you're unmuted.
Okay. Good afternoon. Yes. Dr. Ganesh. Yes. And colleagues and dear friend. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nguyen. I'm chairman of Sovico Group, co-founder and also co-founder with Bajaj. It's a great honor to participate as representative of Vietnam today in Asia Economic Dialogue 2021. Yeah, Sovico Group has been with 30 years to become also leading private group in the country with investment in banking and finance, in aviation, in real estate, energy, oil and gas. Yeah. In each industry, we are highly regarded as an innovative and transparent group that seek to deliver breakdown values, create sustainable growth, and bring great benefits to its customer and client. We are proud to be a multi-sector investment group that has made significant and far-reaching contribution to Vietnam's private economy and the development of Vietnam, known of its integration, self-dependence, innovation, and development. Yes. In the past month and weeks, during dialogues with partners and industry experts around the world, I have often been asked if Vietnam is ready to be an alternative manufacturing destination for the world, and my answer always is yes. Yes, it is. Yeah. This is not the earlier beginning of Vietnam manufacturing industry, as good exporting has always been Vietnam's leading sector. Yeah. With the country's top export being electronic, footwear, clothing, and machinery, respectively, shifting production of these industries from everywhere to Vietnam, and will not be too costly and time consuming. A prime example of South Korean tech brand Samsung, who has been manufacturing here for over a decade with investment on $17 billion, and today achieved export with 25% of the volume of total export Vietnam. In 2018, the line made in Vietnam were stamped on half of Samsung smartphone and accessory supply worldwide, bringing in a revenue of $70 billion. Samsung's presence also leads some of its South Korean suppliers and partners to set up a shop in Vietnam. In the past, Intel, Nidec, MG, and others already made billion-dollar investment in Vietnam, and recently manufacturers like Nintendo, Sharp, Tektronix, and Kyocera all announced plans to move several processes of production to Vietnam. And Foxconn, a Taiwanese electronic manufacturer, one of Apple's key suppliers, already acquired a piece of land in Vietnam to establish a factory and hire up to thousands workers. Last year, Gotech, another Apple manufacturer, also revealed that the company is moving its production line to Vietnam with trial production launching soon. To capitalize on the opportunity of shifting supply chains, we will need to continue to develop our infrastructure and build up capacity. Relative to other markets, Vietnam's GDP is lower, and on a per capita basis, it is still below many developing countries. Labor supply is moderate, and the logistics as well as transportation infrastructure needs to be further developed. Vietnam's excellent COVID-19 response gives it a unique opportunity to increase its footprint in the world's economy and to push ahead with its agenda of reforms, so it can accelerate its quest to become a high-income economic in the foreseeable future. To tackle the challenge ahead for better infrastructure and capacity across Vietnam, the government is strongly focusing on enhancing infrastructure and capacities, and recently announced major projects which will go into operation in the near future. In December last year, the Transport Ministry announced that in the next 10 years, Vietnam targets to have at least 5,000 kilometers of expressway from around 1,200 kilometers that has already been built to the country. Ho Chi Minh City as an example plans to improve the transport infrastructure across all modes of transport between 2020 and 2030. Work will be carried out on 639 kilometers of roads and 78 bridges, as well as 18 intersections, bus rapid transit system, 379 kilometers of waterway, and 212 kilometers of urban rail will also be improved. Another key infrastructure project in the southern part of Vietnam is the Longhand Airport. In January this year, the Airports Corporation of Vietnam announced the construction start for the Longhand Airport project. The airport is expected to start operating by 2025 and will boost the infrastructure and capacity for South Vietnam. It will have the capacity to serve nearly 100 million passengers and handle 5 million tons of cargo annually. As our Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc said at the groundbreaking ceremony in the southern province Dong Nai, the Longhand International Airport is among of next anticipated 16 airports in the world and a key project in streamlining the country's transport infrastructure network, which will serve to attract more multinational to Vietnam. The future is looking bright for Vietnam as free trade agreement, CPTPP, EVFTA, KVFTA, GVFTA are making this choice Asian country more attractive to other countries ever outside the Asia Pacific region. Since 2016, foreign direct investment has been pouring in skyrocketed from $15 billion to $35 billion over the course of 3 years. Vietnam's GDP in 2018 also experienced an optimistic increase of 7.1%, and even during the challenging last year, Vietnam's GDP growth to be among the world's highest in 2020 with 2.4%, and to 2021 this year, so the blending 7% of growth GDP. Yeah. And the last one example, our Vietjet with 10-year operation. Today we became the leading airline in Asia Pacific with nearly 100 aircraft, Airbus, and with order of 400 aircraft narrow body with $50 billion to deliveries for next 7 years. And Vietjet already carry more than 110 million passengers and million cargo, and with 156 they fly destination over Vietnam and across Vietnam and Asia Pacific. Yeah. And in the end, thank you very much for your attention. In case you have further questions on Vietnam's readiness and alternative manufacturing destination for the world, we would be delighted to connect with you after the conference. Thank you very much, and wish you all the best. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hung. And I think it's always amazing to hear the growth of Vietnam. I was in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City a year and a half back, and it was, I mean, it's really bubbling with confidence, and congratulations to you and all the other entrepreneurs and the government for making that happen. Also, great success of your airline, and we look forward to hearing more about your airline as we go along. So thank you, and we'll come back to you with questions. May I now request Rajiv Bajaj to give us his views, because Rajiv has been one of the most dynamic entrepreneurs in India and also has made a tremendous success story of exports in the motorcycle segment. So Rajiv, look forward to hearing your views.
Thank you, Ganesh. Hello, everyone. Allow me to first make a very brief introduction of Bajaj Auto in the context of today's subject of reliable supply chains. So my company, Bajaj Auto, is a 75-year-old company. This is our 75th year. For over 50 years, it would be fair to say that we were a domestic manufacturer of essentially low-cost scooters. And then since 2001, we began our transition over the last 20 years to becoming what I would like to call a global marketeer of high-tech motorcycles. Today, after 20 years of having begun this endeavor, Bajaj Auto is the third largest motorcycle maker in the world by volume, which I think is not insignificant in the sense that this has been achieved over just 20 years. We are in fact now the world's most valuable two-wheeler company by market cap. We are the world's largest three-wheeler manufacturer, again by volume. And we like to call ourselves the world's favorite Indian because about half of what we make is exported to over 70 countries around the world. The reason I want to put this before you is because you can imagine that in the process of this transition, there must have been a deep impact on our supply chain, starting from distributors, dealers, through the company, and all the way back to our suppliers and the tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 suppliers. My objective in these few minutes is to share with you the three guiding principles that have stood by us in our endeavor to overhaul or re-engineer our supply chain. These three principles have been those of individualization, holism, and vitality. And in the interest of time, I'll elaborate on the first one, and then if we have time later on, I can do so with the other two as well. By individualization, what we simply mean is that just as each of us likes to believe that we are an individual, and what makes us the individual that we are is what we have in uncommon with others. In the same way, every company, I believe, is unique, in its objective or in its business model or its strategy. And therefore, it must do in respect of supply chain what is correct for itself, which may or may not be the same as for its competition, for example. And now, since we are a country that is lately quite enamored with buzzwords and acronyms, let me elaborate on this concept of individualization, basis what I like to call the 5 E's. The first E is the E of excellence. And in the context of reliable supply chain, what I mean is that we need to build modularity as excellence into preferably the product. In our case, let's say a motorcycle sub-assembly like a engine or suspension. If that is not possible, then at the part level, and otherwise at the very least at the process level. By doing so, not only in our factories, but across the supply chain, we de-risk ourselves and make our supply chain more reliable in the face of the uncertainties that we will encounter from time to time. The second E is that of exigency. I was taught a long time ago that one of the 3 evils is inevitable in a supply chain. The first evil is that of lost sales. And of course, as business people, none of us would like to accept the proposition of losing sales. The second evil is that of inventory. And by now, we all know that the only inventory that we usually have is what customers don't want. So that doesn't help. And the last evil is that of extra capacity. And this is the choice, I think, that we must all make to have extra capacity in place in a smart, in an intelligent way, in order to protect ourselves in the face of adversity or uncertainty. This point of extra capacity leads me to the third E, what I like to call the economies of scale. Because in my industry, for example, we find that when one is making 500,000 motorcycles or 2-wheelers a year, we are pretty much hitting economies of scale. And frankly, at about 1 million units a year, you have captured all the benefit that there is to capture. And in fact, it could be even argued that growing larger than that at a single site almost becomes dysfunctional, leading to diseconomies of scale. The reason I mention this is because when we install capacity, as we do, we have a capacity of a little over 5 million vehicles a year. We have found it useful, again, in the interest of reliability of the supply chain, to de-risk by geography and not build all of that capacity in one state, however attractive that state is. And as you can imagine, the considerations are varied, ranging from access to market to what local competencies might be offered by a certain site or venue. So that's the third E. The fourth E, I have found in my experience to be very important. And again, this varies company to company, is that of execution. Because we know that in the end, strategy is execution. And the greatest enemy of execution is complexity. So we don't want complexity in a supply chain. And my experience has been that we add a lot of complexity because of managerial speculation. And a lot of that speculation comes in chasing the notion of demand rather than chasing the reality of growth. And when a bunch of people sit in a meeting room and ponder theoretically over growth and the pursuit of double-digit growth, I think they introduce a lot of theory, a lot of hypothesis into what is otherwise a very real situation in the marketplace, and then they build on that plans and roadmaps that are not reliable. And then that affects the supply chain eventually. And the final and the fifth E I would like to place before you is that of the environment. I have seen so many examples, particularly, and I'm speaking again in the context of my experience in our supply chain. So many examples in recent years where I think for good reason, people have become very particular about safety, health, and environment regulations. And I have seen many organizations that we deal with being heavily penalized, even being shut down for failure to comply, not because they did not wish to, but they were not vigilant enough. So these are the 5 E's that I think individualize any given manufacturing organization such as ourselves. These have proved very valuable to me to keep in mind as we go about building a reliable supply chain. And as I said, if time permits later, I can elaborate on the other 2 points of holism and vitality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajiv. That was really very unusual and very nice. And we'd love to explore the other points later, and I'm sure we'll come back to that. And thank you very much, because it kind of shows what makes Bajaj Auto a special company in India and possibly all over. May I now request you, Dr. Choi, to give us your words of advice on what is happening in your part of the world and what you see happening in Asia.
Yeah, so first of all, it's a great pleasure to be part of this panel today. And as you can imagine, a lot is happening in Korea as well, just like in many other countries. The consumer behavior is changing, corporate strategy is changing, and government is coming out with new policies, of course. And as a consumer, myself, you first experience what's going on around you, and you see a lot of changes, particularly in service industry, because that's where the contact between people to people happens. And with this pandemic and COVID experience, as you know, as they say, we're moving towards more contactless or less contact type of behavior and industry patterns. So especially in service industry, for example, banking, of course, in this country, the trend of online banking has been quite prevalent already, but then this pandemic brought us a speeding up the process. And of course, more and more people, even myself, are using a mobile banking. And that's a big change. And as a result, the banks, consumer banking especially, and for example, Citibank here, they're closing down many branches because they don't see the reason why they need to maintain as many branches as they used to have. But now they're merging several branches into one large one. And then they'll hire more sort of tech person who can support the IT department of theirs, rather than having the staff who are working on the window, the banking window. And groceries, for example, supermarkets here, they're closing down some of the larger stores because they see the trend of selling more and more online. So they're expanding their online ordering and online delivery system business, which is expanding and sometimes new. And of course, we have other companies who are joining that process, like what Amazon is doing in the US. We have a Coupang and other companies that is doing that type of service as well. So, I mean, for the first time in my life, I used online ordering of my groceries a few months ago, and it worked. And I mean, of course, it's not 100% satisfied, but it looks like I'm going to be using some of that service as well in the future, even after the pandemic, because as you go through the experience, you see the value of this type of services that's provided. I mean, let's look at other retails like McDonald's. When you go to McDonald's, we used to see 3 or 4 salesperson, right, at the counter. Not anymore. Maybe a year or 2 years ago, when I walked into McDonald's here, I would probably see 3 people, greeting you at the ordering counter. Not anymore. I see only 1 person. Instead, I see about 5 machines. The self-ordering machines and self-paying, all this digital transformation is coming in. So I think there is a huge changes occurring in service industry. Manufacturing, of course, is a slightly different, changes they're experiencing. And as our topic is a supply chain in this panel, that's where manufacturing industry has experienced through this crisis, as they experienced disruption of their business and production especially at the plant level, not because of not much of the human factor, but more of supply disruption and interruption. And they're looking at it in different perspective now, because for the last 10, 20 years, the corporate strategy in supply chain was basically low cost strategy. That's why most of the companies went to China, where you can get your supplies at the lowest price and then the cost. Not anymore. I think already many corporations are changing their strategy. Now they're looking at the security issue, market access to those supplying source of a region or a country or an area. And they would like to get this safe access to their supply sourcing. Therefore, their priority is shifting. And because of that, you will probably see more trend of moving away from China, of course, and then to other countries. And that's where Vietnam and India and even Korea are having some advantageous situation now, and then probably more so in the future. And in Korea, for example, the company I'm with now, Mahindra Group, we have many auto supplies that we're getting from Korea and farm equipment. And now we're getting some requests from our Tech Mahindra, the Mahindra Group's IT arm, our business. And Tech Mahindra, for example, is doing a global sourcing, outsourcing business. And one of its customer is a large American company, for example. And they basically asking Tech Mahindra to change sourcing from China to other countries. Now, partly because of this concern about continuous supply chain, however, also the trade issue between the US and China, and that is also a big concern, particularly for American companies. So they would like to basically move away, if not 100%, definitely reduce supplies coming from China, and they would like to diversify into other regions. And they're looking at, for example, Korean, medium-sized companies where they can get a good quality product, but a little more price, but they're willing to pay a little higher price than China sourcing because of other benefits they get, for example. So there's another thing is happening but in terms of a manufacturing industry, Korean manufacturing industry, say producers of final goods, as Dr. Hong mentioned, like Samsung and others, but they also see opportunities in exporting other items to other countries, going through this process. And I think this is where non-China countries like India, Vietnam, and then, as I said, even Korea, Japanese sourcing could be probably too expensive for many other companies. They're looking at other countries, other sourcing areas where they can get a safe sourcing security and then good access in the long run. Government-wise, of course, Korean government, for example, came up with a new policy they call Korean New Deal policy. Basically two-pronged policies. One is a Green New Deal, The other one is digital. So a digital transformation area, Korean government would like to support more with the government funding. They announced that they will invest about more than $50 billion into a digital transformation of Korean industries. Therefore, that's another area the government is focusing in, an industry will probably benefit as a result of those new policies coming in. I have a few more things to say, but for the sake of giving other opportunities to other speaker, let me stop here. Maybe in the second round, maybe I can come back, maybe trade policy issues.
Yes, definitely, Dr. Choi, because I also want to tap your brains on what Korea might be thinking in terms of digitalization. It's an interesting topic for us. So I'll definitely come back. So let me now request Mr. Yokoo. Yokoo-san, what are your comments, please?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to participate in this session today. My name is Yokoo from Japanese conglomerate Mitsubishi Corporation. I'm based in Mumbai and responsible for our operation in India. You may know that the Mitsubishi Industrial Group is the largest corporate group in Japan, and one of core companies is Mitsubishi Corporation. Mitsubishi Corporation ourselves started operation in 1954 as a trading house. At present, in addition to trading, one more main activity is investment in companies and manage and operate companies by ourselves. As for trading and corporate management, the business environment was very tough in this fiscal year due to the pandemic, Immediately after the pandemic started in February, March last year, movement of our trading cargoes were dramatically reduced, or some cargoes were totally stopped for a few months. Trading declined, and the profit of the companies in which we invested also declined. Around the world, consumer spending has decreased, and manufacturing of product has declined. Demand for raw materials for manufacturing products has also decreased. However, the environment has already changed. The business environment has returned to pre-COVID. In addition to the recovery, new business opportunities has come up. This is a change in global supply chain. Everyone realized that we should not depend on China too much. We are looking for a supply base to replace China. Actually, Japanese companies are also paying attention to India. We have recognized attractiveness of India, such as Indian government's policies to encourage FDI, like product-linked incentive, huge and young human resources, and improving infrastructure in India. However, not many Japanese manufacturers decide to enter into India immediately. There are several reasons. First one is language. There are many people who speak Japanese in Korea, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, and many in East and Southeast Asia. Second one is culture. The culture and the mentality of people in East and Southeast Asia is similar to that of Japan. Third one is distance. Japan is located closer to East and Southeast Asia than India. That's true. It's convenient to come and go. There's no time difference in East and Southeast Asia. Fourth one, this is the biggest reason, I believe. It's misunderstanding by Japanese about India to consider same as China as two so big and similar countries in the world. China is so tough market for foreign companies, including Japanese companies. We Japanese companies recognized it in last 20 years. Language and culture can be solved by mutual compromise. The distance never changed, but we found it can be managed through video conference like today. We are now very familiar with this convenience too, and we somehow overcome the distance. The question is India different from China? I believe yes. I expect India to be a reliable partner for Japan with a long-term relationship. However, Japanese companies are still hesitating to come into India. That's because simply not many Japanese companies are successful in India so far. Even successful companies, they took 5, 10, or 20 years to make a profit. In this regards, I believe that Japanese manufacturers should consider India as a supply base, in addition to expecting of a big consumer market. It's true that India is promising huge consumer market. So everybody make a big factory, big setup in India. However, they can't sell it in large scale from the beginning. In the early stage, it's good to export product overseas and make profit from overseas. After a couple or several years, it's sure that Indian market will grow and the sales in India will increase. Japanese companies, we should learn from US or European companies who went this way and got success with India. India has a geographical advantage. It's close to big market, the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. There are many South Asian countries which India is closer than China. Right? So I believe that India has very good opportunity, potential. So I'd like to listen other panelists' view today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yokoo-san. I think what I will do is I'll just maybe request each of you to talk about specific areas which are interesting to me and I'm sure to the audience. And let me reverse the order. Let me start again with you, Yokoo-san. See, you mentioned some very interesting things. And you mentioned that maybe people in Southeast Asia are more comfortable with Japan because of language. You also mentioned culture. In fact, the conference is hosted by the Pune International Center. And Pune is a city where there is huge amount of focus on Japanese and Chinese language training. In fact, there are many institutes. So I was just wondering that if somebody had to really be a partner, a very good partner to a Japanese company, is there anything that they need to understand about Japanese culture that you may want to mention to the audience here? So the audience is mainly from India and of course, other parts of Asia. So what is that aspect of culture which you think is very different in your vantage position in Mumbai and what you have experienced in Tokyo?
Right. Yeah, actually, I've been in India for 3 years so far. Before that, I didn't have any business with India, or Indian people. So I really didn't know about India or Indian people until that time. And I had, honestly say that I was a bit scary to come to India. Actually, I had a bitter experience in China in 15, 20 years back. So but actually when I came to India and I recognized that I had misunderstanding about the India country, Indian people. Actually, the mentality is not so different with respect to people, each other. We want to help the person who has any trouble or difficulty. That's the same. But actually, business manner is a bit different between India and Japan. Actually, that would be the reason that the Indian companies have been working with US or European companies. So it would be different from Japanese style. So I think that we can overcome that one because we now understand, gradually understanding Indian people, Indian culture, Indian customs. That wouldn't be difficult for Indian people to understand Japanese. You just don't have so many opportunity to communicate with Japanese so far. But as you, Dr. Ganesh, is trying to encourage your young guys to see Japanese, to look at Japanese, including education of Japanese language, it would be great help for the future relationship between India and Japan.
In fact, Yokoo-san, you'd be surprised. When I first took over as CEO of a large software company in the city of Pune, the first day I went to the canteen to have lunch with the employees. And I found 4 girls very much from this city speaking to each other at lunchtime in Japanese. Really? So I was very surprised. Yes, very surprised that even at lunchtime, they said, no, we have to practice our Japanese because we want to go to Tokyo and be very successful. So I'm hoping that what you said will come true, that people want to speak other languages than local and English and make that happen. But thank you. That's a very useful input. So Rajiv, let me come back to you. And maybe, first on this point on, you're working in so many different parts of the world, exporting. Do you see, from a large manufacturer point of view, do you see concerns or do you see problems that your people face it may be going all the way from Venezuela to Africa to wherever. Is that one issue? And second, of course, if you could touch upon your second and third mantras, that would be very useful.
Sure, Ganesh. So let me say that our exports today, well, first of all, let me make the point that India is the world's largest motorcycle market, which is why half of what we make is sold here. Our exports today are primarily to the developed markets of US, Europe, Japan, Australia, by virtue of our partnership with KTM, and also obviously to the Indian subcontinent, to most of Africa, and to the relatively smaller markets in Latam and Asia, ranging from, let's say, Mexico to Cambodia. And say to the Philippines as well. We are not in Venezuela yet. It's terribly uncertain market to go to. The reason I'm saying this is because we've not had reason to establish manufacturing operations or an elaborate supply chain in any of these markets, because as you can imagine, in the developed markets, it doesn't make sense from a competitiveness point of view, whereas the Latam and Asian markets are too small. Most of our operations are based here. However, I can tell you that since we hope to venture into Asia in a significant way in the near future, we did an elaborate comparison of certain metrics. And that would in fact lead me to my third mantra, as you have christened it, of vitality, which I will like to share with you again. This is the acronym of the 5 L's. And these L's are quite simply the time-honored L's of land, labor, electricity, logistics, and the legal system. And we did quite an exhaustive comparison of India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia, I believe, on these 5 metrics. And to be honest, we were not very pleased with what we found as a conclusion, the conclusion we drew for India basis this analysis. And I think we can put it all together and call it the ease of doing business. So our experience so far has been that, however limited, that operating something in one of the ASEAN countries is certainly easier than what we encounter here in India. So that was in response to your question, and also the principle of vitality. The other principle of holism is quite simply this, that we must not be in the context of reliable supply chains, like the 5 blind men on the elephant, who see the fan and the column and the rope rather than the whole elephant. And here, at the risk of drawing your ire, I present you the 5 C's. And these are quite simply, again, in the context of supply chains, the C of commitment, which I think is so important. A sense of mutuality and reciprocity is indispensable to building at least the kind of very intricate supply chain that the auto industry needs to deliver the final product to the customer. Second, the C of continuity. And I say this in the context of what happened in around June or July, when our government, for whatever reasons, suddenly came down hard on imports, especially from China. Now, to my mind, doing something like that is to cut your nose to spite your face, because overnight, how can one source components that are simply not made in the domestic market that you need to deliver product to domestic or export customers? So, maintaining continuity is a second important aspect of the holistic view of supply chains. Third is, of course, competitiveness. We have found that it is cheaper in the noble sense of the word to make something out of China. It is cheaper to procure sometimes something out of Thailand, etc. So needless to say, we must always procure stuff from wherever it is most competitively available. So competitiveness is the third important C. The fourth is completeness. See, Ganesh, we like to believe that we are a global company. And therefore, this, to my mind, from a cultural point of view, and an operational point of view demands completeness or inclusiveness, not just of employee gender, but of having dealers and distributors all over the world and equally suppliers from all over the world. And that is why I, for example, believe that we must continue to trade with China, because if we conduct our business at the exclusion of such a large country, such a large market, we will find ourselves incomplete over time, and we will be poorer for the loss of that experience. And finally, if I may be a little philosophical, I would say the fifth C is that of compassion. Because I think when you're dealing with suppliers, we, for example, have 225 suppliers, many of whom are exclusive to us or depend largely on us. And I think in that sense, as much as passion is important to build a reliable supply chain, I think equally compassion is also very important, because let's face it, at the end of the day, we are all interdependent. We live on one planet and we are one family under God.
That's a very good one. And you also mentioned at the beginning of your session that you are positioning yourself as a truly high-tech motorcycle manufacturer. So do you see yourself becoming in motorcycles and two-wheelers what, let's say, an Elon Musk and Tesla is to the vehicle market, four-wheelers?
We said to ourselves a long time back that we are not going to play at only one or the other end of the market. If we are going to narrow our focus to just motorcycles at the exclusion of all other options ranging from mopeds and scooters to cars and trucks, then we are going to put ourselves in a position where we can address all segments. So today, we are the only motorcycle maker that you will find in Africa, for example, and also in Germany, in the sense that today I am told every third motorcycle sold in Africa is a Bajaj motorcycle. And of course, we have competition there from other Indian players and from Chinese manufacturers. However, these makers are not really present in the US, European, Japanese markets. Our competition is more the Japanese OEMs, the European OEMs, and American OEMs, none of whom can compete in, say, the African market. So if you look at markets across the spectrum from Africa to America, Bajaj is perhaps the only motorcycle company that is present significantly across these markets. And I think that is really the magic of the alignment between the front and back ends of our business, because from the same kitchen, to be able to dish out the equivalent of, at the one end, there is a $1 hamburger that we sell in Africa, and on the other hand, you're making an exotic, let's say, pasta to serve in Italy. I think this is quite a feat of engineering, if I may say so.
And your supply chains are good enough that the hamburger will not land up in Italy?
Well, whatever happens in Italy stays in Italy, I hope.
But just one last question. I mean, when I was in Vietnam for a week, I didn't see a single Bajaj vehicle in Vietnam. Is that a conscious choice or what is it?
No, you're absolutely right. And that is why I said that these larger markets of LATAM, such as Brazil particularly, and these 3 or 4 markets here in ASEAN, including Vietnam, we have not yet ventured into those. And I'll be very candid to say that's because this is the stronghold of Japanese makers. So as one of my co-speakers was saying, if you wade into such a red ocean without a smart strategy, it may take 20 years to make money. So we need to put together a smart strategy first, which I think we've done now, along with our partners, KTM. And with this, we hope in the near future to make our way to Vietnam as well. So hopefully you will buy a Bajaj motorcycle soon in Vietnam, Ganesh.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hung, I just want to ask you a couple of questions, because one is, of course, if you look at the growth of China in the overall manufacturing ecosystem, it's been largely through their outstanding special economic zones, SEZ policies, also has been because of a very good clusters policy. Now, if you look at the chemicals industry, for instance, there's chemical clusters that have really become very, very significant, and I can go on and on. So you spoke about infrastructure, you spoke about the physical infrastructure the government is doing, a lot of investments. So is there any kind of a clustering policy where similar companies of manufacturing the same thing can be in one place together and can get helped in terms of exports, etc.? Any thoughts on that? Or anything unique about Vietnam that you would like to tell us?
Yeah. Yes, okay. Understand your question. We are talking about creating infrastructure in Vietnam, especially you see US-China war. US-China war and now moving many manufacturer from different country, they moving China to Vietnam, and here you see for last few years and next near future there will be moving a lot of industrial park, yes, logistic industrial park, and in different province like Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi, Dong Nai, Bình Dương, yeah, there's the Korean, Taiwanese, Hong Kong, Malaysian, Japanese, and yeah, to join Vietnam, yeah, and Vietnam already prepared for this with all kind of infrastructure, and the labor still cheap in Vietnam, electricity, gas, and policy, everything. I think the government ready for us to receive that investment. Yeah.
So,
That's,
Dr. Would it be right to say that Vietnam's focus will be on labor-oriented manufacturing clusters and not so much on automation, where you can use lower-cost labor and compete effectively with what China used to be in the past? I'm just trying to understand what could be the strategy for which sector Vietnam really wants to be a dominant player.
Sector, right? I see. So you see electronic, we have Samsung, LG, Foxconn, on the things. You see even healthcare, yes. Automation also, yes. We have local production, and especially many Japanese, Korean, American, Taiwanese, right, production for motorcycle, for car, electrical car, everything, yes, and many other sectors. Among of that, you see Korean, Japan, Taiwanese, Singaporean, is the top 5 also invested in Vietnam. Yeah, especially Korean very active, yeah, in Vietnam. So now can say that's the leading. Yeah, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Hung.
Yeah.
Choi, one question to you is, you mentioned, of course, this whole digital strategy. And again, just to lead off from what Dr. Hung said, I mean, if let's say Vietnam is going to focus on a lot of labor-intensive, low-cost kind of things, as well as other areas, what do you think is Korea's focus? I mean, is the Korean government looking at high-tech manufacturing, much more of automation, much more of digitally enabled industry 4.0 smart manufacturing kind of areas, or is there a different focus for Korea as a country?
Well, I think it's not much of a different focus for Korea. The digital manufacturing, the fourth industrial revolution, that type of activities throughout the industries, and government is looking at additional support they could probably give in terms of newly being developed, the venture capital business, new startups, especially in IT area, software. But those areas, I think, India is probably more competitive. I think Korea is playing a catch-up game here in that area. But nevertheless, I think Korea is sort of forced to spend and invest more into that area. But throughout the society, I think the digital transformation is occurring, and government would like to see more investment, for example, in education, educational system, online education, and more, and also infrastructure, data capability, and then a network capability and investment and technology investment, R&Ds in artificial intelligence. And those areas, I think, are more and more investment of corporate investment and also government investment will be spent in Korea. But lastly, going back to a supply chain issue, so as a result of this new trend, I think many corporate, CPOs, purchasing officers, they'll probably think that they need at least some domestic production. However, the cost would be higher in case of emergencies like pandemic. And if that is not achievable, then at least diversify sourcing area. Therefore, they don't need to depend, 90% from China, but also some other countries. And as a result, in order to secure that the supply chain, the continuous, I expect to see more of a stronger alliance relationship in economic relations and trade relations. So I see more and more, regional pact coming out, and the importance of it being a part of a regional pact will be more important, because many purchasing officers will look at it. If, for example, in the US company, if they have a plant in Canada, they can provide their supplies, or in Mexico, because they have the security of being part of NAFTA. And if you're part of, let's say, some other regional pact, then you feel safer to get access to their supply market. So I see the current trend of moving away from, unfortunately, the multilateral trading system and towards more of a regionalism, and hopefully not towards the total protectionism, but I mean that type of trend will continue, and many of that is coming from big change in supply chain by experiencing and going through this pandemic experience. Because even after this COVID-19, many people would expect different type of pandemic or different type of crisis will occur, and they would like to be ready and have a sort of defensive system built into their corporate strategy and also national strategy.
So do you think, Dr. Choi, that the walls that have come up across the flat world, they are here to stay? That protectionism will happen, whatever be the new world?
Well, I think that will continue for a while. I think the system, which was a great system the world built after the war, post World War II period, was great. But I think it has reached a point where many, and at least some countries, especially large economies, felt some of the negative impact of that system onto their own individual economies. So they would like to come back and readdress this issue, whether this will have to continue, whether it's good for them, national interest, for their national interest or not. But I think we'll see some improvement compared to last few years during a Trump era. And as you can tell from Biden presidency administration, I think the mood will change. I think in multilateral area, it's a little better, but regionalism, I think it will continue. And US sort of protectionist stance will also continue, because you have to keep in mind that Biden presidency is coming from Democratic Party. And if you remember, Democratic Party compared to Republican Party in the US has always been, well, ever since 60s and 70s, a rather protectionist stance than the conservative Republican Party. So I think that will continue on. It's also interesting in terms of supply chain. President Biden has just announced that they will review the US vulnerability in supply chain because, probably because ongoing crisis in that industry, especially with computer chips. As many of you know, we have some shortage of a production there. So many companies all over the world are concerned about access to the supply of computer chips. but also they're looking at other areas like electric vehicle batteries, production, and also specialized minerals, where few countries have a monopoly of that. And especially through this pandemic experience, the medical gear and other equipment supplies. So those are the sort of ongoing issues.
No, you're absolutely right. I think rare earths, even computer chips, as you rightly said, EV batteries, I think all these are going to be big issues if it's single sourced from one country. Absolutely. Mr. Yokoo, I have a question for you based on what I think Dr. Choi was saying, which is that if you look at it from a Japan point of view, I mean, Mitsubishi and your other big companies in Japan, would they be now looking at China plus one? You mentioned India, of course, but I'm saying, is there a formal strategy to say we should look at a China plus one or a nearshoring or a reshoring strategy? I think people are having this discussion in the boardrooms across Japan.
Right. So actually, the Japanese government trying to support the private companies to do that one. So they recently, last year actually, they made a certain amount of fund to encourage the private companies to set up new supply source other than China. They didn't say China directly, but the new policy shows that program shows that they encourage private companies go into Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. So actually, I'm now actually recommending my friends, our business partners, to come to India utilizing that fund.
Mm-hmm. I see. That's very interesting. So Rajiv, there's a question for you, which is that, I mean, when you say, is it possible that, you know, as you export to various parts of the world, that you would look at a center of excellence kind of strategy, you know, where you could maybe set up a center, which is, let's say, a Bajaj auto center in Vietnam, which is a base for expansion into Southeast Asia. So is there a hub and spoke kind of strategy that you would evaluate?
Sure, Ganesh. The short answer is yes. And we are already doing that through our relationship with a company called Modenas in Malaysia, and now with a partnership in Thailand. So at this moment, specifically not Vietnam, but it is part of a larger strategy. While KTM accesses the market through the Philippines, we have good reason to do it with partners through Malaysia and Thailand. And we try to structure the relationship such that you know, it's complementary and works well for both partners. So I don't know if we can call it a center of excellence, but certainly it's our gateway into the ASEAN market.
And another question for you is, somebody says in rural India, small farmers are facing major difficulties with supply chains in getting their produce to market. And the current options are very expensive. Can Bajaj Auto offer some affordable options for small cargo transportation from rural to semi-rural areas?
Oh, well, we have, I believe, in our three-wheeler, perhaps the most economical means of transporting goods of all kinds, from refrigerators to farm produce, in small lots. And these are, if I may say so, rather hardy vehicles. They run on gasoline, diesel, CNG, LPG, and sometimes, although not designed to, but on kerosene. So I think we have a pretty versatile solution there. Can there be something better? Perhaps it's something I must think about.
What is your view on the whole electric vehicle opportunity for India and for other parts of the world?
I think it's a fantastic opportunity for India, quite honestly. My view is that fundamentally, like with anything new, you know, you tend to disrupt your existing business. And I think the reason all over the world, as also in India, electric vehicles have not moved forward as much as they should have, as swiftly as they should have, is because of the inertia of the incumbents. You know, you don't want to replace a profitable petrol or diesel vehicle overnight with a loss-making electric vehicle. And that is why Tesla does what it does before a German car maker does it. You know, I don't think the Germans are not smart enough. They just have interest in their current business. So I think I have always felt that being a startup should not be the prerogative of just a startup. In every existing business, there must be a startup mentality. And that is why we started last year with our own electric vehicle in the form of a brand called Chetak, which is a scooter, a very popular brand in India, as you know, because we do not have an existing IC engine-based scooter business. So we have no vested interest in keeping petrol scooters going. And I think with two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which are essentially light vehicles, the major hurdles to electrification, such as what is the size of the battery, cost of the battery, charging time, range, etc., these get mitigated to a very large extent. So while it may take some time before electric cars are mass, I think it can happen very rapidly in India. But again, beyond what motivated and enlightened manufacturers must do, there is an ecosystem issue as well. I mean, if you go to the Chinese cities, they have been built for electrified vehicles, you know, because it is inevitable that when the powertrain technology changes, the form factor of the vehicle must also change. Electric vehicles may have to be single seat, lighter, smaller vehicles than their IC engine counterparts. And, you know, you would not feel very safe on Indian roads as they are today in the midst of heavy traffic on something that is relatively fragile. So you need special lanes, for example, at least in major cities, to give consumers the confidence to ride such vehicles. So I think that's the big picture, but I think the government seems very keen on this. I think Niti Aayog is driving this very strongly. So is the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. It seems to be an initiative right down from the PM's level. So at least as Bajaj Auto, we are very excited about this because it puts you at the starting line with the rest of the world again. You know? On motorcycles, we had to play a huge catch-up of time lost over 50 years. Here we are almost at the starting point like everyone else.
That's a great point to close this discussion on, because you're absolutely right. I think post-COVID, everybody will be at the starting line in any country, any company of many industries. So that's the opportunity. But I must say thank you very much to all of you, because I think it was a fascinating discussions, because we looked at country strategies, we looked at company strategies, the opportunities in various sectors and the challenges. And as all of us know, global supply chains will keep getting disrupted, will keep getting recreated. And I think it was really amazing to hear the strategies of Vietnam, Japan, Korea, and of course, India, and to see how we can think from our own point of view on how we can capitalize on the opportunities in the future. So thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you,
Back to you, Ananda, for closing.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Back to you.
Thank you to all our panelists who took the time to share their insights with us. We would also like to thank those attending for their attention and patience. The fourth session of the Asia Economic Dialogue 2021 on Wither WTO post-COVID-19 pandemic will begin at 4:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. We look forward to seeing you then.